Black Navy SEAL, walks into a parking lot, a woman in a wheelchair, two cops, a crowd doing nothing. He sets down his groceries, crosses the lot, fixes the chair himself, doesn't ask for thanks, doesn't wait for it. She watches him drive away and thinks, when was the last time anyone asked my permission before touching my chair? She can't remember. What she doesn't tell him, not yet, is that she's worth $2 billion. That the man who put her in that wheelchair is a United States senator. He destroyed this stranger's military record 6 years ago to protect himself. And now that senator is coming to this town, he comes to the garage alone. No cameras, no staff. He spreads his hands like a reasonable man and makes an offer. The SEAL looks at him for a long moment, sets down his wrench. No, the senator smiles. Think about that. He shouldn't have come here. There's a kind of man you don't see much anymore. Not on television. Not in the movies. Not in the news feeds that scroll past you before you've finished your morning coffee. You see him in small towns, in places like Dillon, North Carolina, where the roads are 2 lanes and the stoplights blink yellow after 9 at night, where everybody knows your name. Not because they're nosy, but because that's just how it is, when a town is small enough to still be human. Marcus Cole was that kind of man. He opened his garage every morning at 5, not because he had customers coming in at 5, not because anyone expected it, because the quiet of 5 in the morning was the only quiet that felt completely clean. No noise from the street, no voices, no weight of the day pressing down yet, just the smell of motor oil and cold concrete and his own hands moving through familiar work. The garage sat on the corner of Elm and Route 9. Faded sign above the door. 2 bay doors that rolled up with a sound like a low chord. A single fluorescent light buzzing over the entrance. The kind that flickers for the first 10 minutes until it warms up. Outside it looked like nothing special. A working man's building, functional and unadorned. Inside, everything had a place. Every wrench on its hook. Every socket in its tray, every rag folded and hung on the line above the utility sink. The floor swept every evening before he locked up. The workbench clear except for whatever job was active. It was the kind of order that doesn't come from a tidy personality. It comes from 20 years of learning that, in certain situations, not knowing where your equipment is can cost something you can't get back. Marcus had learned that lesson more than once. He was 52 years old, 6 feet even, broad through the shoulders, moving through the world with the particular economy of a man who had learned long ago not to waste motion. His hands were the first thing people noticed when they shook his hand, thick, scarred at the knuckles, with calluses built up in the specific places that come from decades of real physical work. Not gym work, not the careful maintenance of appearance. Real work, kind that leaves permanent marks on your body and doesn't apologize for it. He was black, born in Fayetteville, 40 miles north. Raised by his grandmother, Dorothy Cole, after his mother left, and his father followed not long after. Dorothy had been a practical woman with a deep faith and a low tolerance for excuses. She had taught him 3 things before he was 12 years old. First, your word is the only thing that's entirely yours. Second, if something's broken and you can fix it, fix it. Third, don't walk away from people who need help just because helping is inconvenient. He had carried those 3 things through 20 years in the United States Navy, the last 12 as a SEAL. He didn't talk about that, not in Dillon. Not with customers. Not even much with Warren, who was the closest thing he had to a friend. Some things don't translate into conversation easily. Marcus Cole had never been a man who said things he couldn't stand behind completely. He'd come to Dillon 6 years ago. Quietly. The way a man arrives somewhere when he's not running toward anything, in particular, just stepping back from the noise of a life that had gotten louder than he could manage. He'd seen the garage listing in a regional trade publication. Pete Harmon, retiring at 68, didn't want to sell to a chain or a corporation, wanted somebody who'd actually work in it. Marcus had called, they'd met. 2 weeks later, Marcus had the keys. His wife Diane was gone by then. She had passed 3 years before he came to Dylan, cancer. The quiet, advancing kind that presents itself all at once, after it's already been everywhere. They'd had 9 years together, good years, years with weight to them, kind of years that make the space left behind feel specific, not general. He didn't miss her in some vague narrative way. He missed her in exact moments. The sound she made when something surprised her. The way she arranged things on a shelf so they were both organized and somehow still warm. The way she argued, direct, fair, and completely unmovable. Once she'd decided she was right, she usually was. He lived alone now in a 2-bedroom house on Carteret Street, 4 blocks from the garage. He cooked simple things. He read in the evenings, history, mostly, and the occasional crime novel. Diane would have made fun of him. 4. He slept adequately, which was more than he'd managed for years after she died. He walked to work before the sun came up, and he locked the garage after dark. He did not perform his grief for anyone. He did not perform his solitude. He just lived it. The way you live something that's become the shape of your days. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, he was underneath a 2009 Ford F-150 that belonged to Gerald Marsh, who ran Marsh Feed and Supply 2 blocks east. On Route 9, the transmission had been slipping for months. Gerald was the kind of man who dealt with problems by deciding they might resolve themselves. They rarely did. Finally, the truck had nearly died. On him, pulling out of a customer's driveway, and he'd had no choice. Marcus had it on the lift, working the diagnostic. By feel as much as instrument. 20 years of mechanical work, first in the Navy, then here, had given him a relationship with engines that was hard to explain to someone who didn't have it. Not mystical, just deep familiarity. The way a doctor knows a body not just by what the charts say, but by the way a patient holds themselves when they walk in. The radio was on low, an AM station out of Fayetteville that still played traditional country, Patsy Cline. Then some Merle Haggard, the kind of music that sounds like. It was written by people who had actually lived something long enough to sing about it. Honestly, he heard the familiar sound of boots on the concrete apron outside, a particular rhythm he recognized without needing to look. Warren Glick. Warren was 67 years old and had been running May's Diner on the corner of Main and 3rd since 1993. He was white-haired, heavy-set, with a face that had done a lot of living. Not a handsome face, but an honest one, the kind that gets more interesting as it ages. He had married his high school sweetheart, Lorraine, raised 3 children in this town, buried Lorraine 11 years ago, and kept the diner running. Because stopping would have meant sitting still with grief, and Warren had decided grief worked better when you kept your hands moving. Every morning without exception, he brought coffee, 2 cups, one for himself, one for Marcus. He never asked if Marcus wanted it, never announced he was coming, just showed up with it, the same way the sun showed up. Not asking permission, just doing what it did. That's the kind of friendship you can't manufacture. It builds up over years of small acts, unremarkable individually, unmistakable in their accumulation. Morning, Warren said. Morning. Marcus slid out from under the truck, took the coffee, and drank it standing up the way he always did. Not sitting, not leaning. Standing, which was the only posture that felt natural to him, at 5 in the morning. Warren leaned against the open bay door, looking out at the empty street. The sky was going from black to that particular shade of dark blue that exists for maybe 20 minutes each morning before the sun commits. The storefronts across the street were dark. A single car moved at the far end of Elm, heading toward the highway. "Marsh's transmission?" Warren asked. "Yep. He's been putting that off since April." "May," Marcus said. He mentioned it in May. Either way, Warren drank his coffee. "Man treats that truck like it's going to fix itself. Most people do." They were quiet for a while, the sky lightened by slow degrees. Somewhere down the block, a screen door opened and closed. Probably the Hendersons, who got up early to let the dog out. This was the thing about Warren's morning visits that Marcus valued without ever saying so. Warren didn't come to talk. He came to be present. There was a difference. A lot of people who said they were checking on you were actually looking for something. Reassurance, information, the feeling of having done a good thing. Warren just showed up, drank his coffee, watched the street, asked a few questions that required short answers, and left when the coffee was gone. After a while, Warren said, "You eat anything this morning?" "I'll eat. That's not what I asked." Marcus looked at him over the rim of his cup. Warren's expression was the same one he'd been making for 6 years. The expression of a man who has already had this conversation and knows how it ends. "I'll come by at 7, Marcus said. "I'll have eggs." "I know you'll have eggs, Warren. You always have eggs." "I'm just saying they'll be ready, I understand." Warren finished his coffee, set his cup on the workbench with the easy familiarity of someone who has been setting cups on that workbench for years. He pushed off the door frame and walked back up Elm Street toward the diner without saying goodbye, because they both knew the conversation was done, and goodbyes were unnecessary between people who would see each other in 2 hours. Marcus watched him go, drank the last of his coffee, turned back to the truck. He worked for another hour in the quiet, which was the best kind of working. There was something Marcus had not told Warren, had not told anyone in Dillon. His Navy pension had been partially suspended 3 years ago, the result of an internal investigation, a formal inquiry into a mission that certain people had decided went wrong for reasons that had more to do with politics and contracts and the interests of people who sat at desks than with what had actually happened on the ground in those hours when Marcus and his team were doing the job they had been trained to do. He had been cleared of the most serious charges. The investigation had concluded without a court-martial, without a formal finding of misconduct. But the record still carried a flag, an administrative notation that sat in his file like a stone in a shoe. Not disabling, but always present. Enough to hold up a portion of what he had earned. Enough to make the monthly deposit into his account less than it should have been. He had not hired a lawyer. He had not made noise about it. He had made up the difference doing extra work. Farm equipment repairs on weekends. Engine diagnostics for the county vehicle pool. At a flat cash rate. Whatever came through. He worked more hours than he billed for, because billing required paperwork, and paperwork required revisiting a situation he had decided to leave in the past where it belonged. He had not made peace with it. He had simply decided it was not going to be the thing that defined what came next. In the back corner of the garage, on a shelf above the bulk parts storage, there was a metal box. Green, military grade, with a combination lock. Inside, it were his service medals, his honorable discharge papers, and a single folded letter, the official notification of the investigation's initiation, stamped and signed by people whose names he no longer said out loud, even in his own head. He had not opened that box in over 2 years. Some mornings, passing that corner on his way to the workbench, he looked at it just for a second. The way you look at something you've decided to leave where it is. Then he looked away and got back to whatever was in front of him. That was the only way Marcus Cole knew how to keep moving. You look at what's in front of you. You use your hands. You do the work that's there to be done. You don't wait for someone else to come, make it right. He had no reason, that Tuesday morning, to think any of that was about to change. He had no reason to think that 2 miles away, a woman was making her own slow preparations, checking the charge on a power wheelchair, calculating the route to a supermarket, running through the logistics of an ordinary errand that had stopped being ordinary for her 6 years ago. He finished the diagnostic on Gerald Marsh's transmission and went to start on the parts list. By 9 o'clock, he would be in a parking lot on Main Street, and nothing after that would be entirely the same. Eleanor Voss had not always been someone who needed to calculate a parking lot before entering it. There was a time when she moved through spaces without thinking about them. When she walked into rooms, boardrooms, construction sites, government offices, airports, and the room simply accommodated her. The way rooms accommodate people who are upright and mobile and don't require the world to be built differently. That time was 6 years ago. She thought about it less than she used to, or she thought about it differently. In the early months after the accident, the loss of that ease had felt enormous. Not just the physical reality of the wheelchair, but the secondary losses that came with it. The way spaces that had never registered as obstacles suddenly revealed themselves as hostile. The way people's behavior changed. The slight recalibration in how strangers looked at her. The small adjustments in their voices. The way she had gone overnight from being someone who moved through the world to someone who negotiated with it. She had learned to live with that negotiation. She had made it efficient, but she had not made peace with the things that had caused it. Eleanor was 58 years old, a Black woman who had spent most of her professional life being the only person in the room who looked like her, and who had decided early on that the most effective response to that fact was not performance or apology, but precision. She said what she meant. She made decisions with the information available and then committed to them. She did not require consensus to act. She had grown up in Durham, the daughter of Gerald Voss, who ran a small commercial construction company with 12 employees and a stubborn belief that if you've built things right the first time, the reputation would take care of itself. Eleanor had worked summers in the office from the age of 14, not answering phones, learning to read contracts, learning to see the difference between what a document said and what it meant. She had taken over full leadership of Voss Industries at 35 when her father's health made it necessary. She had made the company, something her father had been too cautious to make it, not reckless. Eleanor was never reckless, but willing to move at the speed the opportunity required to make the call before the moment was gone. 23 years, one company. Revenue that had grown by a factor of 30. She didn't lead with that number. She didn't lead with any of it. The profile pieces written about her focused on the numbers, because that was what profile pieces did. What they didn't capture, what she had decided early on, wasn't their business, was the cost, the decisions that kept her awake, the relationships that hadn't survived, the demands she'd placed on her own life, particular loneliness of being someone whose judgment people trust completely and whose private moments no one asks about. And then the accident, and then Derek Holt. But she wasn't going to think about Derek Holt right now. Right now, she was in a parking lot on Main Street, Dillon, North Carolina, and her chair was locked. The safety mechanism had engaged without warning, a fault she'd had serviced twice in the past year, a sensor issue in the 20.1 model line that the manufacturer kept calling resolved, and that kept proving them wrong. The chair had stopped moving in the middle of the access lane, not on the sidewalk, not in a parking space, in the lane itself, between two rows of parked cars, in a position that was genuinely inconvenient for the vehicles that might need to pass. She ran the reset sequence. Nothing. Ran it again. The indicator light blinked steadily. Amber, which meant the safety lock was engaged and not releasing. A pickup truck slowed, navigated around her. The driver glanced over, did not stop. An older couple walked past, close enough to touch. They looked at her. The brief, uncomfortable inventory that people gave someone in a wheelchair, never quite settling on the right expression, and kept walking. Eleanor kept her hand still in her lap. She had learned over 6 years what panic produced. Nothing useful, so she did not panic. She ran the reset a third time, already knowing it wouldn't work, because she needed to confirm it before moving to the next step. The patrol car turned into the lot. 2 officers. The one who stepped out first was young. 25, 26, she estimated. He had the particular energy of someone who has recently been given authority and is still finding the edges of it. Ma'am, you can't be stopped in the access lane. Eleanor looked at him with the patience she reserved for people who were explaining the situation back to her without having asked anything about it. First, my wheelchair malfunctioned, she said. I'm not stopped by choice. You're creating a hazard. There are 4 cars in this parking lot and no moving traffic. The hazard is limited. She kept her voice even. She always kept her voice even. I have a sensor lock fault. I need either a push to the sidewalk or assistance resetting the override. That's the actual situation. The officer's partner had stepped out now, older, mid-30s. With the look of someone who had read this situation faster than his colleague and was already working out how bad it was going to get. We can call someone, the first officer said. You can help me, Eleanor said. That would be faster, ma'am. I'm not qualified to push a chair 6 feet to the sidewalk. Eleanor looked at him, just looked. The full weight of 58 years of saying things that needed to be said to people who did not want to hear them. You're not qualified to push a chair. 6 feet. The officer's jaw tightened. He reached for his radio. There were people watching now. 5, 6 of them. Standing at the edges of the situation, the way people gathered around things that might turn into a story. Waiting, not helping. Watching to see which direction it would go before they decided whether to have an opinion about it. Eleanor had lived this before. Many times in many forms. The performance of watching, careful non-involvement of people who were near enough to do something and had decided that doing something was someone else's job. She held very still. Inside, something was building. Not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. Something older and more complicated than anger. The accumulated weight of 6 years of absorbing things without visible response, because visible response had always made things worse, and she had learned that lesson so many times it had become reflex. She held it. Then she heard footsteps. Not hurried, not dramatic, just steady and purposeful, crossing the parking lot at a pace that covered ground without making a point of it. Marcus Cole had been heading to his truck with 2 bags of groceries. He'd come in for transmission fluid and ended up with soup for the week, because Warren had mentioned. He hadn't been eating enough, and because the store had a sale on the kind of chicken broth Diane used to keep in the cabinet, and he'd stood in the aisle looking at it for longer than he intended before putting 4 cans in the basket. He registered the situation in the time it took him to cross 15 feet of asphalt. The wheelchair, the amber indicator light, blinking on the armrest, the 2 officers. The first officer's body language, which was the particular language of a young man who has decided he's right, and is now performing that conviction for an audience. The woman in the chair, straight-backed, hands still, face carefully composed, with something behind the composure that Marcus recognized without being able to name it exactly, except that it was the look of someone absorbing something they shouldn't have to absorb. He set both grocery bags on the hood of the nearest parked car, walked to the wheelchair, crouched down at the left side, and looked at the base of the armrest. "Safety locks engaged," he said, mostly to himself. Reading the indicator, sensor fault, the first officer stepped toward him. "Sir, this isn't. Manual override is here." Marcus indicated the panel without touching it yet. 3-click sequence and a hold. "Takes about 20 seconds. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." Marcus looked up at him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't change his expression. He just looked at the officer with the particular quality of stillness that develops in a person after a certain number of years and a certain number of experiences. The kind of stillness that makes the person it's directed at suddenly conscious of how much noise they've been generating. "The mechanism malfunctioned," Marcus said clearly and without heat. "This woman needs the override sequence run and a push to the sidewalk. That's all. Can do both in under a minute if you want to stand there, or you can help, and we'll be done in 30 seconds. Either way, we're doing it." The first officer's mouth opened, closed. His partner put a hand on his arm. A small gesture, the kind that transfers a message without words. Marcus looked back at Eleanor. "With your permission, ma'am." Eleanor had been watching him since he walked over. Watching the way he moved, the efficiency of it, the complete absence of performance. He hadn't looked at the crowd, hadn't looked at the officers to see how they were reacting to him. He'd looked at the chair, assessed it, and proposed a solution. "Yes," she said. "Please." Marcus ran the override. 3 quick presses of the release button beneath the armrest panel, then held for a count of 2. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and the amber light went green. He stood, moved to the push handles. "Sidewalk okay?" "Yes." By the entrance, he pushed her to the sidewalk in front of the supermarket. Smooth and level, no rushing. Set her square on the flat concrete where the ground was stable, and she had room. Then he walked back and picked up his grocery bags. The first officer was talking low to his partner. The crowd was already dispersing. The show had ended without the conclusion they'd assembled for, and so they drifted back to their errands. With a vaguely disappointed look of people who had been promised something and hadn't received it. Marcus passed the officers on his way to his truck. "Have a good day," he said, not pointed, not loaded, just the words a man says when a situation is done. He put the groceries in the truck. He got in. He started the engine. "You didn't ask my name." He stopped with his hand on the gear shift, looked in the side mirror. Eleanor had turned her chair and was facing the parking lot. He turned his head and looked at her directly through the open window. "No," he said. "People usually ask. People who help usually want to know who they helped," Marcus said. "I needed to know the chair was locked. That's what I needed to know." He put the truck in reverse, pulled out, drove out of the lot. He did not look in the mirror again. She watched his truck until it turned onto Main Street and was gone. She sat on that sidewalk for another 8 minutes before going into the store. Not because she needed to, because she was thinking about something she hadn't thought about in a long time, and she needed the space to finish thinking it. She could not remember, not with certainty, not precisely, the last time someone had asked for her permission before touching her chair. It seemed like it should not be remarkable. It seemed like it should be the minimum. And yet, she went into the store, bought what she came for, drove home. That evening, she sat at her desk and looked out at the oak trees, turning rust and gold in the late October light. She thought about a man in a gray work shirt who had looked at a broken thing and fixed it without needing to be thanked. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had done that, either. The chair came back to his garage the next morning. Not Eleanor, just the chair in the back of her van, driven by Carla, her assistant, composed young woman, who explained the situation in 2 sentences and left Marcus with a business card and a clear, unhurried expectation that he would call when it was done. Marcus spent 90 minutes with the chair. The fault was a firmware version issue in the safety sensor array, a documented defect in a 2021 batch that the manufacturer had issued a limited recall on, but that apparently hadn't reached this particular unit. Someone at the last service appointment had missed it. He updated the firmware manually, recalibrated the sensor thresholds, and ran 8 complete cycle tests to confirm the fix held under varied load conditions. He wrote 1 line on the invoice: parts, none, labor, notes. Recall issue. Contact manufacturer's accessibility compliance department directly. Reference number attached. When Carla returned, she looked at the 0 on the invoice and said, "Ms. Voss would want to pay for his time." "The recall should have been caught in service," Marcus said. "That's on the manufacturer. Tell her to ask for accessibility compliance when she calls. They'll try to route her to general customer service. Don't let them." Carla nodded and left. The next morning, Eleanor came herself. She pulled into the lot. At 10 came out on the lift and wheeled across the concrete to the open bay door. Marcus was working on a Honda Civic with a coolant leak. He straightened up when she stopped in the doorway. She looked at the garage. He'd watched her look at things before. The way she inventoried spaces, read their organization, understood what they said about the people who maintained them. He let her look. "You should have charged me," she said. "Nothing to charge for. Your time is worth a thing. So is yours. You spent 6 months with a chair that should have been recalled. Call that number." A pause. "Why did you help me?" "In the parking lot." He looked at her directly. "Because the chair was broken, and you needed help, and I was there. That's all?" "That's all." She studied him, the way she studied contracts, looking for what wasn't on the surface. "Most people who help me," she said carefully, "want something after, not always money. Sometimes just acknowledgement, the feeling of having done the right thing in front of an audience." "You know I helped," Marcus said. "You were there." Something shifted in her face. Small. "Real. I'll call the manufacturer," she said. "Good." She turned to go. "Miss Voss." She stopped. He held out a card, the recall reference number, the direct extension, "Ask for accessibility compliance." Specifically, she took the card. A pause between them that was neither awkward nor empty. Just a moment finding its own shape. "Thank you, Marcus." "Eleanor." She went back to the van. He went back to the coolant leak. 2 people returning to their respective work, but something had been exchanged. Something small and real that neither of them would have been able to name if asked directly. The third encounter wasn't planned. 2 days later, a Friday, Marcus was in his booth at Warren's diner when Eleanor came through the door, or tried to. Warren appeared before she decided on her angle, carrying the oak ramp he'd built, and finished himself. Set it at the threshold without ceremony. "Made it last week," he said. "Figured somebody would need it." She looked at the ramp at Warren. "You didn't know I was coming." "No, but somebody always does." He held the door. She came in. She didn't see Marcus until she was inside. He was in the corner booth, coffee halfway up. She saw him a pause. Then she moved toward the counter, not his table, giving him his space. Not assuming anything, Warren put coffee in front of her without asking. She started to say she hadn't ordered. "Everybody in here is cold or tired," Warren said. "Coffee first." He slid a menu across. Then, without drawing attention to it, moved her coffee to the low section of the counter, where the height was right for her. Just did it, as if it were the natural arrangement. She noticed. She noticed that he'd done it without making it an event. "The eggs are good," Marcus said from his booth. Eleanor didn't look over immediately. "Are they actually good? Or are you just saying that? I've eaten here every Friday For 6 years. That's still not an answer. Yes, it is. Warren made a sound in the back of his throat. He was already cracking eggs. They ate. She at the counter. He in his booth, and talked across the room in the easy way of people with no particular agenda. The road work on Route 9, the way the light was changing. The relative merits of Warren's coffee, which Eleanor said was stronger than she expected. It's not strong, Warren said, refilling without being asked. Other places just make it weak and call it normal. That's a very specific position. It's an accurate one. Marcus said nothing, but there was something in his face. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in that direction. When Eleanor was ready to leave, Marcus was still sitting. Finished but not gone. "You're waiting to see if I need help with the door," she said. "Warren's bringing me a second cup." Warren appeared with the cup. Set it down, looked at neither of them. In a way that communicated he was aware of both of them. Eleanor looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his coffee. Eleanor left. Warren leaned on the counter. "Interesting woman. You know anything about her?" "No. Lives alone on Beaumont. Carla drives in from Laurenburg most mornings." He wiped the counter. "You notice she didn't ask for anything the whole time she was here?" Marcus drank his coffee. "Just an observation," Warren said, and went to the kitchen. 3 weeks passed, slowly and fully, the way October passes when you're paying attention to it. Marcus and Eleanor had fallen into something without deciding to. Not friendship yet. Friendship has a moment of acknowledgement, a crossing of some implicit line. This was the stage before that, the careful gathering of information about another person. The slow building of a picture. They saw each other on Fridays, at the diner sometimes, other places midweek, not by arrangement. Just by the arithmetic of a small town. Eleanor had started talking to Warren. Not extensively, but genuinely. She asked him questions about the town's history. Which buildings had been there longest? Which families had been here since before memory? Warren was exactly the right person for those questions. He'd been paying attention to Dylan for 50 years and had the memory to prove it. Marcus watched without commenting. What he observed was how Eleanor moved through the town. Precisely self-contained. She planned around obstacles. She managed. She did not ask for help, and if help was not offered, she found the other way. No frustration on her face when things didn't work. Just the adjustment, made efficiently, made quietly. He recognized that quality. He had built it in himself over a long time. The skill of absorbing friction without letting it show. The discipline of needing things and not performing the need. It's a useful quality. It protects you. It also costs you things you don't always notice losing. 1. Thursday evening, a hard rain came in fast. Marcus was locking the garage when he looked up the street and saw Eleanor's van wasn't at the diner overhang, where she was sheltering. He got his truck, pulled up to the entrance. They sat in the truck for 27 minutes, waiting for Carla. Rain on the roof, radio on low, neither of them in a hurry to fill the silence. "You chose Dylan deliberately," Marcus said at one point. "Not a question." "Yes, because you could be anonymous here. Because I could be a person here." She watched the rain on the windshield. "There's a difference. A name isn't a person. Sometimes it's the opposite of one." He thought about that. "You came for something similar," she said. "Something like that after the Navy, after some things." She didn't push. He noticed that, the way she left the door where he'd left it. Most people opened doors they hadn't been invited through. Eleanor did not. They sat in the truck. The rain came down. The radio played something neither of them commented on, and in the quiet, something accumulated, the kind of thing that accumulates in silence between two people when both of them are paying attention, and neither of them is performing. Carla arrived. Eleanor transferred to the van. She paused before the door closed. You didn't ask me anything about myself tonight. You'll tell me what you want me to know, Marcus said. When you want to. A pause. Then the van door closed. He drove home. Stood at the kitchen window with the lights off. Thought about what he'd said. Thought about when someone had last said it to him. He couldn't place it. It came apart on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Through an ordinary moment that turned out to be something else. Marcus was working on a delivery van. On the side panel below the company logo, Voss Industries, Contract, Fleet Unit 7. He looked at it. The name snagged on something. That evening, a client mentioned on the phone that Voss Industries was looking at regional acquisitions. His son-in-law was in commercial real estate. Had flagged it as significant. Marcus got off the call, sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop. He typed the name, hit enter, read for a long time. Eleanor Voss, CEO, 23 years leading Voss Industries. Built the company from regional construction into one of the 50 largest private infrastructure firms in the country. Net worth, $3 billion. Forbes list, 2019. Known for low public profile following a serious accident that same year resulting in permanent disability. There was a photograph, corporate. Eleanor in a dark jacket, looking directly at the camera, with the expression of someone who has considered every possible outcome of the photograph and is comfortable with all of them. Marcus looked at the photograph for a while, then closed the laptop. He sat in his kitchen in the quiet. The neighbor's porch light was on across the street. The clock made its small sound. He thought about the parking lot, the 27 minutes in the truck in the rain. Most people who help me want something after. He didn't sleep well. Next morning, 5 o'clock. Warren brought coffee. Marcus was quieter than usual. Warren let it be. At 9:20, Eleanor's van turned into the lot. She came out on the lift, crossed the concrete, stopped in the middle of the garage doorway. Marcus was at the workbench. He'd heard the van and come out to meet it. They looked at each other. 5 seconds of silence that held more than most conversations. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus said. Eleanor's posture didn't change, but something in it shifted. The adjustment of someone who has been expecting a question. Tell you what, specifically? She said. Who you are. I told you my name. I know your name, Eleanor. She held his gaze. What would you have done differently? She said. If I'd told you from the start the parking lot, would you have fixed the chair differently? No. The rain. Would you have waited differently? No. Then what would have been different? He was quiet, because she was right. And Marcus Cole had never been a man who argued against things that were right. You should have told me, he said anyway, because that was also true. Maybe she didn't retreat from it, but I need you to understand something. Her voice was even and clear. I have spent my entire adult life being a name, being a number. Someone else is calculating what access to me is worth, what knowing me means for their position. She paused. I came here because here, for the first time in years, I was not that. And you were the first person who looked at me and saw a situation that needed handling. Not an opportunity, not a liability. Something in her voice went quieter. I wasn't ready to give that up. The garage was still. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started despite the season. A dog barked once, stopped. Marcus looked at her for a long time. The way he looked at things he intended to keep. I won't tell anyone, he said. I know how. Because if you were going to, she said, it would have been the first thing out of your mouth when I pulled up. He almost said something, changed his mind. Turned back toward the workbench. Marcus, he stopped. I should have said something sooner. I am sorry for that. He was quiet for a moment. I understand why you didn't. He picked up his wrench, went back under the truck. His voice came from below the frame. Warren does biscuits Saturday mornings, real ones. Not from a can. A pause. Is that an invitation? Eleanor said. It's information, Marcus said. What you do with it is your call. He heard her cross the lot, heard the van lift engage, heard her drive away. He worked under the truck in the quiet. That was already a different kind of quiet than it had been an hour ago, the kind that has something in it. He thought about what she'd said. The first person who looked at me and saw a situation that needed handling. He thought about what that meant, what it cost a person to go years without that, what it cost to absorb everything alone and make it look like a choice. He knew something about that cost. He'd been paying it for years. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know what this was turning into or where it was going or whether he was ready for any of it. He was 52 years old, and he had been careful, and he had kept his life small, because small was manageable, and manageable was something. But he also knew, had always known, the part of himself that was most honest, that you cannot protect yourself from everything worth having, that the same walls that keep out hurt, keep out the rest of it too, that there is a point where careful stops being wisdom and starts being just another word for alone. Saturday was 4 days away. He went back to the work in front of him. The radio played. Morning moved through the garage at its own pace. One problem, then the next, the way it always went, the way it always would. 4 days. Saturday came, then another Saturday, then a third. Nobody announced it as a tradition. It just became one. The way things become traditions in small towns, through repetition and the quiet agreement of people who don't need to discuss everything they've decided. Marcus was always there first. Warren's corner booth, the one by the window that looked out on Main Street. Coffee waiting. Eleanor would come in somewhere between 8:15 and 8:30, and Warren would bring her coffee without being asked. She would settle at the end of the counter, where the height worked for her chair, and they would eat in the same space without sharing a table, and talk. Off and on, unhurried, about whatever the morning brought up. It was not a romantic arrangement. It wasn't trying to be anything. It was just two people who had found that the other person's company did not require them to perform, and who had, without discussing it, decided to keep that. Warren watched all of this with the expression of a man who has seen enough of life to recognize something real when it's happening in his diner. He didn't comment on it. He brought coffee. He kept the ramp at the door. He made sure the low section of the counter was always clear on Saturday mornings. The conversations were not dramatic. That was the point of them. Eleanor talked about work. Not the numbers, not the headlines, but the texture of it. A decision she was weighing about a contract in Wilmington. A project manager who was good at his job, but couldn't read a room. The way infrastructure strokes truising, because of supply chain pressures that nobody in the industry wanted to talk about publicly because talking about them meant admitting uncertainty. Marcus listened the way he listened to everything, fully without rushing to respond, without looking for his entry point. When he said something, it was specific. A question that showed he'd followed what she said. An observation from a different angle than she'd been looking from. Not advice. Just another perspective set on the table for her to use or leave. She noticed that he never told her what to do. She had spent 23 years surrounded by people who told her what to do. Some of them were right. Many of them were wrong. All of them told her anyway, because that's what people did when they were in the presence of a decision and wanted to feel useful. Marcus did not do that. He held space for her thinking without trying to occupy it himself. She didn't tell him this. She didn't need to. He would have been uncomfortable with the observation, and she understood discomfort with compliments. Well enough to leave it alone. Marcus, for his part, talked less. When he did, it was about the work, a particular problem on a particular engine, a customer who'd brought in a vehicle so neglected. It was almost moving, occasionally about Dylan. Some piece of local history, Warren had mentioned. Some change in the town that was either progress or loss, depending on how you looked at it. He did not talk about the Navy. He did not talk about Diane. He did not talk about the metal box in the back of the garage. Eleanor did not ask about any of these things. She waited. She was good at waiting. 23 years of negotiation had taught her that the most important information almost never came when you pushed for it. One morning, in November, 3 weeks into their Saturdays, the diner was quiet. A weekday, Thursday, and Eleanor had come in for coffee on her way back from an appointment in town. Marcus happened to be there for a second cup, which Warren raised an eyebrow at, because Marcus didn't usually do second cups on weekdays. They ended up at adjacent positions for the first time, her at the low end of the counter, him on the stool beside it, closer than their usual arrangement. Warren found reasons to stay in the kitchen. They talked about a documentary Marcus had watched on the history of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Eleanor had driven it once years ago, before the accident. She described it the way people describe places they can't get back to, with a specificity that meant they'd been paying attention at the time, storing the details against some future need. I didn't know I was memorizing it, she said. You never know which things you're memorizing until you can't go back. Marcus was quiet for a moment. No, he said. You don't. They both knew they weren't only talking about a parkway. That was the thing about conversations between people who had both lost something significant. The real subject moved underneath the surface. You talked about one thing and meant another, and both people understood this, and no one had to say it directly, because saying it directly would have made it smaller than it was. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Sheriff Calvin Pruitt pulled his county vehicle into the garage lot at 8:30. Marcus was under a John Deere tractor that belonged to a farm operation 12 miles south. Weekend work, cash, the kind of job that helped cover the gap the pension left. He heard the vehicle, heard the particular weight of Pruitt's footsteps. A big man, 61 years old, with bad knees from 30 years of carrying a duty belt. Marcus. Marcus slid out from under the tractor, sat up, looked at Pruitt. Calvin Pruitt had been sheriff of this county for 11 years. Before that, a deputy for 14. A large white man with gray hair cut close, and the kind of face that had started out plain and become, through use, something more interesting. He'd known Marcus since Marcus came to Dylan, had welcomed him in the way of a man who knows the difference between someone who's come to cause trouble and someone who's come to be left alone. They were not close friends, but they understood each other, which was sometimes more useful. Pruitt stood in the bay door with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the look of a man who is driven somewhere to say something he's been working up to. Got a call yesterday, Pruitt said, from a law office in Charlotte. Faulkner and Associates. He paused. They were asking questions about you, about the investigation. 2019, Marcus said nothing. Background questions, employment, residence. Whether you'd had any legal trouble since coming to Dylan. Pruitt pulled at the back of his neck. I didn't answer anything, told them to go through proper channels, but I thought you should know who hired them. They didn't say. I did some checking. Faulkner and Associates does a lot of work for political campaigns. Opposition research. He paused. There's a name that comes up when you look at who uses that office regularly. Another pause. Derek Holt. Marcus knew that name. He'd never met the man, but it was in the investigation file. Not prominently, but there, in footnotes. In the chain of communications that preceded the investigation's initiation. He had read that file many times in the first year, looking for the shape of what had been done to him. He'd found it. He'd also found that knowing the shape of something and being able to prove it were entirely different problems. Holt's running for Senate, Pruitt said. I know. He's got something scheduled in Dillon next month. Town hall at the Civic Center. Marcus looked at his hands. Then at Pruitt. I appreciate you telling me, Marcus said. I didn't have to. I know. Pruitt shifted his weight. Marcus, whatever's in that investigation file. I don't know the details. I never asked. But I've known you 6 years, and I know the kind of man who does what that file says you did, and the kind of man who doesn't. He held Marcus's gaze. You're the second kind. He walked back to his vehicle. Marcus stood in the garage bay for a while. After the cruiser pulled out, the tractor waited. The tools waited. The work was right there. He didn't move for a moment. He picked up his wrench and got back under the machine. His hands did the work they knew how to do while something moved through his mind that he hadn't let move there in a long time. Derek Holt. He turned the name over, set it down, picked up the next problem in front of him. But the name stayed where he'd set it, solid and patient, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to be looked at directly. Friday, Eleanor came to the diner early. She was already at the counter when Marcus arrived at 8. 2 coffees waiting. Warren in the kitchen, unusually quiet. They did the usual morning. The weather, a road closure on Route 9, Warren's new kitchen radio. Then Eleanor said, I have something I want to ask you, and I want you to hear it completely before you say anything. Marcus set down his coffee, looked at her. She turned her chair slightly to face him more directly. Deliberate, she was a woman who did things deliberately. I need someone I trust for my personal security, she said. Not because I'm afraid of ordinary things. Because there are people, one person in particular, who has reason to want to hurt my ability to operate. That hasn't changed just because I moved to Dillon. She paused. I need someone close, someone capable, and someone who won't tell me what I want to hear. I've spent 6 years hiring people from security firms who come with credentials and agendas, and who decide, within 6 months, that they know better than I do how I should live my life. Her voice was even precise. I'm not looking for that. Silence. I'm offering you the position, she said. Formal contract, $80,000 a year, full benefits. 2-year contract with a renewal option. You'd keep the garage, the hours are flexible. Most of what I need is availability and judgment, not constant presence. She stopped. She had said what she came to say. She waited. Marcus looked at his coffee. He looked out the window at Main Street. He looked at the counter where Eleanor was sitting. Straight-backed, composed, actually patient, rather than performing it. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. No, he said. Eleanor didn't react visibly. Just waited. I'm not going to work for you, Marcus said. Not because I don't respect what you're asking. Because if I work for you, then every time I help you there's a reason for it that doesn't have anything to do with whether I want to. We both lose the thing that's actually been useful. Eleanor was quiet. The reason you trust me, Marcus said, is because I don't need anything from you. You put a number on that, and it changes. He looked at her directly. You know that's true. She was thinking real thinking. Not the surface processing she did in meetings, but the deeper kind that showed in the stillness around her eyes. You're saying the value is in the independence, she said. I'm saying the value is in the fact that I'm not getting paid to show up. A long pause. Most people would have taken the money, Eleanor said. Why don't you? Marcus looked at his hands around the coffee cup, the scarred knuckles, the specific calluses. Because I've spent my whole life doing the thing that needed doing, without needing a reason. Beyond that, it needed doing. The day I start requiring payment to care about whether someone I know is safe, he stopped, found the end of it. That's not a line I want to cross. Eleanor held his gaze for a long time. Something in her face changed. Not dramatically, not in a way visible from across the room. But Marcus was close enough, something underneath the composure. Something that had been waiting there and had just decided it was allowed to be seen. "You are a very unusual man, Marcus Cole," she said. "I've been told. I mean it as a fact. I'll take it as both." Warren materialized with a plate of eggs. Marcus hadn't ordered, set it down, went back. Marcus looked at the plate. Eleanor almost smiled. "The real kind. Eat your eggs," she said. He ate. She drank her coffee. The morning settled back around them. But something had shifted. The way the air shifts after a significant decision has been made. Not quieter, not louder, just different. On her way out, Eleanor stopped at the door. "Turn back, Marcus." He looked up. "The person I mentioned. The one with reason to want to hurt me." She paused. "His name is Derek Holt. He's running for Senate. He's going to be in Dillon next month." Marcus set his fork down. "I thought you should know," she said. "Since I assume you know the name." She went out. Warren appeared at the counter. Looked at Marcus. Looked at the door. Looked back at Marcus. "Don't," Marcus said. "I wasn't going to say anything," Warren said. "You were." Warren picked up Eleanor's cup, turned to the counter. "She trusts you," he said, as if that were a complete and sufficient thought. Then he went to the kitchen. Marcus sat in his booth, looking out at Main Street. The same November light. The same street. The same town. But Holt's name was in the room now. And it changed what the room felt like. 2 days later, Marcus went to Eleanor's house for the first time. Not invited, exactly. He had a reason. The recall replacement wheelchair unit had arrived at a medical supply company in Laurenburg. The delivery backlog was 4 weeks, and Marcus knew someone with a truck going to Laurenburg that afternoon for other reasons, and he picked up the chair, drove it to the house on Beaumont Road. The house was set back behind Old Oak's bare in November. Long paved driveway, wide enough for the van. The house itself without ostentation. The kind of house a person from Dillon would call nice, and a person from Charlotte would call modest. Eleanor answered the door herself. Carla was not there that day. She looked at the chair in his truck bed, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." Delivery backlogs 4 weeks. He was already lowering the tailgate. "You're fine on the current one. The replacement is the corrected hardware version." He unloaded the chair, ran the power on test, confirmed the sensor array. "Good," he said. "Shouldn't have the fault, Marcus." Thank you." "You said that?" "I meant it both times." He almost smiled. He was getting closer to smiling than he'd been in some time, which was something he noticed. She invited him in for coffee. He considered saying no. Said yes. The house was organized and uncluttered. Everything. Functional. Nothing decorative that wasn't also meaningful. Books that had been lived with, not placed for appearance. A large desk by the window, a round working table near the kitchen. The inside of a person who thought clearly and moved efficiently through space. And on the desk, propped against the lamp, a pen and ink drawing, a woman in a wheelchair, seen from a slight angle, looking out towards something outside the frame. The likeness was accurate. What made it remarkable was the quality of presence. The woman in the drawing looked three-dimensional in the way that portraits of powerful people usually didn't, because portraitists usually painted the power rather than the person. Marcus looked at it. "Where did that come from, a friend?" Eleanor said, from the kitchen. "Someone who sees things clearly." He looked at it a moment longer, then looked away. They sat at the round table with their coffee. Outside, the November oaks moved in the wind. Eleanor told him about Holt. Not everything, not yet, but the shape of it. Enough. 7 years of marriage. She had understood what he was capable of. Not immediately, but early enough that she'd told herself she could manage it. Which was the mistake people made with certain kinds of people. You couldn't manage them. You could only underestimate how far they'd go. She had filed for divorce in 2019, had refused to sign over partial control of Voss Industries, which Holt had been working toward for years, through legal maneuvering and pressure that had escalated as he understood she wasn't going to yield. 3 weeks after the filing, she had been driving on a road outside Charlotte. The car had gone off the road at a curve. She had survived. Her spine had not. There was an investigation, she said. Findings were inconclusive, no witnesses. Derek had an alibi. She held her coffee in both hands. He always has an alibi. He's a politician. He understands the importance of being somewhere visible when important things happen. Marcus listened. I knew what he had done, Eleanor said, and I had no way to prove it, and he knew I knew. We have both been living with that arrangement for 6 years. But he hasn't let it go, Marcus said. No, he hasn't. She looked at him. He's found a legal approach, a claim that certain assets were commingled during the marriage. My lawyers say it's weak, but a Senate candidate with enough connections can make weak things take a very long time to die. Marcus was quiet. Then, you said his name is in the accident investigation, circumstantially, nothing that would survive in court. She paused. Yet, that word sat in the room between them, small and solid and full of direction. He's coming to Dillon, Marcus said. Yes, does he know you're here? I don't know, possibly. She looked at Marcus directly. I'm telling you this not because I'm asking you for anything. I'm telling you because you're the one person here who deserves to know what they've walked into. Marcus looked at her for a long time. What they've walked into, he repeated. Yes, you think knowing Holt's name puts me somewhere complicated. I think it might. He picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down, looked at the drawing on the desk. Then back at Eleanor. I've been in complicated before, he said. I managed. Something in her face was grateful. She didn't perform it, and he could see it. And that was enough. They sat in the warm kitchen with the oak branches moving out outside and talked. About other things, easier things, for another hour. The way people talk when they've said something significant and need the ordinary world to come back in around it. He drove home through the November dusk. He thought about the drawing on her desk, about what she'd said. The one person here who deserves to know what they've walked into. He thought about Holt, about the investigation file in the metal box, about pieces that had been separate in different parts of his life that were now, slowly, without his consent, assembling themselves into a single picture. He didn't know yet what to do with that. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck, in the dark for a moment. Then he went inside. The call came on a Monday morning, mid-December. Marcus was at the garage, alone early, the good kind of morning, when his phone rang. Charlotte area code, unknown number, Mr. Cole, a woman's voice, formal and careful. My name is Patricia Wynn. I'm the legal director for Voss Industries. Mrs. Voss asked me to reach out to you directly. A pause. She said you would understand why. He understood. Go ahead, he said. We received a call last week through our contact line. A man named Desmond Ferry. He said he was a former employee of Senator Holt's and that he had information relevant to an incident involving Mrs. Voss. In 2019, another pause. He said he's been trying to decide what to do with this information for a number of years. He said that a recent medical diagnosis has clarified his thinking. Marcus leaned against the workbench. Very still, he said. He was present on the night of the accident, Patricia Wynn continued, that he saw things not included in the official investigation. He's willing to provide a formal notarized statement and to speak with investigators if it comes to that. She paused. He's currently in Raleigh, receiving treatment. He asked whether Mrs. Voss would be willing to meet. Silence in the garage. The fluorescent light buzzed. Outside, a truck went past on Elm Street. When? Marcus said. Thursday. He has treatment on Tuesdays and Fridays. I'll drive, Marcus said. A pause. I'll let Mrs. Voss know. He put the phone down, looked at the wall, the tools on their hooks, the fluorescent light, the metal box in the back corner that he had not opened in 2 years. He pulled out his phone, called Eleanor. She answered on the second ring. She knew why he was calling. Thursday, he said. Yes, I'll pick you up at 7. A pause, Marcus. You don't have to, 7 o'clock, he said. The truck heater takes a few minutes. Dress warm. He heard something in the silence that followed. Not a breath exactly, not a laugh. Something between them that didn't have a word for it yet. 7 o'clock, she said. He hung up, went back to the engine he'd been working on. His hands did the work they knew, while the rest of him processed what was coming. Zimond Ferry. A man who had seen something, who had carried it for 6 years, who was now, at the end of some private accounting, choosing to put it down. Marcus understood that the weight of things you'd seen and not addressed, the way they sat in you, not getting lighter, and the moment when you decided you were done carrying them alone. He worked until the morning light outside. The bay door changed from gray to full white. Then he locked up and walked to Warren's for coffee. Warren set the cup down, looked at him. You all right? Fine. You look like a man who's made a decision. I look the same as always. Exactly, Warren said. The look you have when you've made a decision is the same as every other time. So I read the set of your shoulders instead. He refilled the cup. Whatever it is, you're walking into it straight. Marcus put money on the counter. Stewed. Warren. The ramp you built. First day you put it out. Marcus paused. You said somebody would always come who needed it. Warren looked at him. You were right, Marcus said. He walked out. Warren stood at the counter, looking at the door. He picked up the cup, rinsed it, and went back to the kitchen. Through the window, he watched Marcus walk up Elm Street, steady, unhurried, the way he always moved, like a man who has somewhere to be and trusts himself to get there. Thursday came cold and clear. Marcus pulled the truck up to Eleanor's house at 7 exactly. He had the heat running already. He'd idled it in his driveway for 10 minutes before leaving, which was not something he usually did, but which seemed right this morning. Eleanor was waiting at the top of her ramp. Dark navy wool coat, a scarf, the color of winter wheat, the appearance of a woman who had decided what the morning required of her and had dressed accordingly. Marcus loaded her chair. She transferred to the passenger seat. Practiced, economical, self-directed. He waited, engine running, not hovering. They pulled out at 7:03. Raleigh was 92 miles. 2 hours in December traffic. For the first 30 minutes, neither of them said much. This was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had established, over weeks, that quiet between them didn't require filling. The highway opened up north of Dillon. Brown fields on both sides. The sky pale and high. The kind of December sky that has no clouds but gives no warmth. Just light, clean, and honest. Eleanor had a folder on her lap. Documents Patricia Wynne had prepared. She turned pages without reading them, looking at the road. Are you all right? Marcus asked. I've been thinking about what he's going to say. She paused. And how I'm going to feel when he says it. Another pause. 6 years is a long time to know something and have no one else know it with you. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. It is, when someone confirms it, says, I know it too, I was there. She looked out the window. I've never had that before. It doesn't make it lighter, Marcus said. She looked at him. What people tell you, he said, is that having someone confirm the truth makes it easier. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just makes the truth larger. More solid, he paused. But solid is better than uncertain. Uncertain leaves you room to doubt yourself. Solid doesn't. Eleanor held that. Have you had that? She said. Someone confirm something you knew and couldn't prove? Not yet, Marcus said. She understood what he meant, that the flag in his file had not been corrected. He was still carrying something he knew was wrong and couldn't prove was wrong, that they were, in different ways, carrying the same category of thing. She looked at the road ahead. Marcus, she opened her mouth, closed it. She was going to say something and decided. This wasn't the moment. Nothing, she said. He glanced at her. He knew she was holding something back. He didn't ask. Some things came in their own time. You couldn't force them. You had to work alongside them long enough that they decided to open on their own. They drove. He was with Holt for 9 years. Eleanor said, eventually. Patricia's note said that 9 years close to a person. She looked at her hands on the folder. Long enough to see things? Long enough to wish you hadn't, Marcus said. Yes. She was quiet. I keep thinking about what it must have been like, to know and to not say anything. For 6 years, a pause. I'm not angry at him. I understand the fear. I know what it is to see something clearly and decide. You can't survive saying it. When I moved to Dillon, she continued. When I chose to be nobody, that was its own version of the same thing. Knew what Derek had done. I decided I couldn't survive the fight it would take to prove it. So, I went somewhere quiet and waited. She paused. I've spent 2 years being angry at myself for that. You survived, Marcus said. That's not nothing. No, she looked at the road. But it's not everything, either. They drove in silence. Exit signs ticked past. Marcus kept both hands on the wheel, easy and steady. After today, Eleanor said, whatever Desmond says, it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be fast. I know, it could get difficult for you. If it connects to what's in your file, if pursuing Holt puts pressure on you before we're ready, I know that too. And Marcus drove. I've been careful my whole life, he said eventually. Careful kept me alive. When alive was a real question, he paused. But there's a kind of careful that tips over into something else. That starts to look less like wisdom and more like permission you keep refusing to give yourself. Eleanor was quiet. Holt's been careful too, Marcus said. More connected, more protected. But careful people make mistakes. When they stop thinking anyone's watching, he looked at the road. He's gotten comfortable. Yes, Eleanor said softly. Today we find out what Desmond saw. His voice was even. Then we figure out what to do with it. One thing at a time, they reached Raleigh at 9:14. The traffic thickened. Marcus navigated without GPS. He'd looked at the route the night before and had it in his head, the way he had things he'd decided mattered. The medical building was on the west side. Ordinary brick, 3 stories. The kind of building that held difficult things without announcing them. Marcus parked, unloaded the wheelchair. Eleanor transferred. They went in together. In the elevator, Eleanor said, "Don't know what I'm going to say to him." "You don't have to know yet," Marcus said. "Listen first. The words will come." The elevator doors opened. At the end of a corridor, in a small waiting room with plastic chairs and a window looking out on a parking lot, a man was sitting. Desmond Ferry was 70 years old, large, or had been once. There was a diminishment about him now. He sat upright. The bearing of a man who had spent years in the company of powerful people and understood, from that proximity, what it meant to hold yourself with dignity. He saw Eleanor. He stood, slower than he wanted to be, but he stood. "Mrs. Voss," he said. Eleanor looked at him. This man who had known what was done to her, who had been there, who had been silent for 6 years and chosen, finally, to stop. "Mr. Ferry," she said. "Thank you for calling." He looked at Marcus, back at Eleanor. "Is this a friend?" she said. Desmond Ferry nodded. He gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit." They sat. Marcus off to the side, present but not centered, which was always where he positioned himself when the important thing was happening in front of him, rather than to him. Desmond Ferry folded his hands in his lap. He looked at Eleanor with the eyes of a man who has decided to do something and is past reconsidering. "I should have called 6 years ago," he said. Eleanor held his gaze. "You're calling now?" "Yes," he said. "I am," and he began to talk. Outside the window, the December sky was flat and cold. The parking lot held its ordinary collection of cars, going nowhere in particular. Inside, a man who had been carrying something for 6 years set it down at last. Marcus sat off to the side. He listened. He watched Eleanor's face as she heard confirmed by someone who had been present. The thing she had always known. He had been right about what he told her in the truck. It didn't make it lighter, but it made it. Solid, and solid was something you could stand on, something you could build from. Building. Marcus Cole had understood from the time he was a boy in his grandmother's house on the north side of Fayetteville, learning the names of tools and the patience required to use them correctly. Building was what came next. He sat in the plastic chair in the waiting room in Raleigh. He listened to Desmond Ferry's voice fill the quiet room with the shape of what had happened 6 years ago on a road outside Charlotte, and he thought, this is where it starts. Not the end of something, beginning of what came after. Derek Holt arrived in Dillon on a Tuesday morning in December. He came the way politicians come to small towns during campaign season, with advance staff, a rented SUV with tinted windows, the particular energy of someone who had decided, before arriving, exactly what this place was and what it needed from him. The town hall was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Civic Center on Broad Street, but Holt was in Dillon 2 days early, working the room before the room assembled, stopping at May's Diner for coffee and photographs, shaking hands at the hardware store, speaking to the pastor of the First Baptist Church about infrastructure needs in rural communities. Marcus heard about all of it from Warren, who heard about it the way Warren heard about everything in Dillon, through the accumulated intelligence of a man who had been making breakfast for this town for 31 years. "He came in this morning," Warren said, setting coffee on the counter. Tuesday early, Marcus was the only one there, ordered eggs, tipped well, talked about his time in the state legislature like it was something that happened to someone else. Warren wiped the counter with the slow deliberation of a man choosing his words. Smooth, kind of smooth that takes a long time to build. "Did he ask about anyone?" Marcus said. "Not directly." Warren set down the cloth. He asked about the town. Who'd been here long? What families had history? A pause. He asked. About the house on Beaumont Road. Marcus looked up, said he'd heard a property out there had sold to an out-of-town buyer. Said he was interested in local real estate patterns as part of his infrastructure platform. Warren's voice was level. "I told him I didn't keep up with real estate." "Good. I've been not keeping up with real estate my whole life," Warren said. "Not hard." Marcus drank his coffee. The diner was quiet, the particular quiet of early Tuesday, before the town was fully awake. "He's going to find out she's here," Marcus said. "Probably already knows," Warren said. "Men like that don't ask questions they don't know the answer to. They ask questions to see what you'll say." Marcus set down his cup, looked at the window. The street was empty. The December morning still dark at the edges, the streetlights still on. He thought about what Eleanor had said in the truck on the way to Raleigh. He's gotten comfortable. He thought about Desmond Ferry in that waiting room, the shape of what he'd seen on a road outside Charlotte 6 years ago, told in the quiet, careful voice of a man who had made his peace with the cost of saying it. Desmond had seen Holt at Eleanor's car that evening, had seen him reach under the wheel, well, for less than 30 seconds, while Eleanor was still inside the restaurant. Had seen him walk away without looking back. Had driven Holt home that night, never said a word to anyone. Until now, the notarized statement was with Patricia Wynne. A second copy was in a fireproof box in Marcus's garage, next to the metal box he'd finally opened. Warren, Marcus said. If someone came in here and asked you directly about Eleanor Voss, by name, Warren looked at him. What would you say? Warren considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Say, I run a diner, and that in 31 years, I've learned that people's business is their own until they choose otherwise. He paused. And then I'd go back to the kitchen. Marcus nodded, left money on the counter. Walked back to the garage. He had 2 days before the town hall. 2 days, while Holt moved through Dillon, doing the work of a man who had decided this was safe territory. Marcus had spent 20 years learning that the moment an enemy felt safest was the moment they were most likely to make a mistake. He went to work. He fixed what was in front of him. He waited. Holt came on Wednesday afternoon. Marcus heard the SUV pull in, too new and too quiet for his regulars. He slid out from under the Silverado he was working on and stood up before Holt reached the bay door. Derek Holt was 56, medium height, well-built in the careful way of a man who managed his appearance as professional presentation. Silver at the temples, the kind of face that photographed well, open, accessible, built for making strangers feel recognized. Sport coat over a dress shirt, no tie, calculated casual. The language of a politician visiting working people. He came alone, no aide, no assistant. That was deliberate too. He looked around the garage with the expression of a man performing appreciation for craft. Then at Marcus Cole. Not a question. I've heard good things about this place. Marcus looked at him. Said nothing. Holt stepped inside, not far, stopping in the middle of the bay, like a man who understood spatial communication and had chosen his position with care. Close enough to be friendly, far enough to keep options open. I like to meet the people who keep a community running, Holt said. The people who do the actual work. He smiled, practiced until it felt real. 20 years in the Navy. That's the backbone of this country. Marcus waited. I'm going to be direct with you, Holt said, which was always what people said before they weren't. I know you've been spending time with Eleanor Voss. I know she's in Dillon. And I know that some things between us, between Eleanor and me, are complicated. He paused. I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here because I think there might be a way to make things simpler. For everyone. Go ahead, Marcus said. Holt took a small breath. The breath of a man who had prepared for resistance and was recalibrating. There are legal matters between Eleanor and my office. Asset questions from our marriage. My attorneys believe they have a strong position, but litigation is slow and expensive and hard. On everyone. He paused. I'm prepared to let all of that go. Walk away entirely. In exchange for a simple private conversation with Eleanor to reach an understanding. Another pause. And I'm also prepared, as a gesture of good faith, to make some calls on your behalf. I understand there's a matter, a service record issue, a flag in your pension file. That's been unresolved for some time. I know people who can address that. Garage was quiet. So, what I'm offering, Holt continued, his voice lowering slightly, more intimate, more man-to-man, is a clean resolution. Eleanor gets the litigation dropped. You get your record cleared. All I'm asking for is a conversation. He spread his hands. The gesture of a reasonable man, offering a reasonable thing. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the well-made sport coat, the practiced smile. The hands spread open in the gesture of generosity. He looked at all of it and thought about a woman who had driven a car off a road in 2019 because of those hands making a different gesture. Small, quick, 30 seconds under a wheel, well, while no one was watching. He thought about Desmond Ferry in a plastic chair in Raleigh, carrying something for 6 years because he was afraid. He thought about a flag in a file that had cost him a portion of what he'd earned. He looked at Holt. No, Marcus said. Holt's expression stayed smooth, but something moved through it. Brief. I understand this feels. I don't think you do, Marcus said. But that's fine. He turned back to the Silverado, picked up his wrench. You should get back on the road. You have a town hall Thursday. Holt didn't move for a moment, running new calculations. You're a man with a code, he said, almost admiring. I respect that, but codes are only useful if you're still standing to uphold them. He paused. Think about that. He walked out. Marcus listened to the SUV pull out of the lot, watched it turn onto Elm Street and drive away. Then he picked up his phone and called Eleanor. She answered in one ring. He came here, Marcus said. A silence. The litigation dropped. My record cleared. Another silence. Longer, Marcus? No, he said. Before you say anything. No, that's not what this is. He watched the December afternoon empty out on Elm Street. But you need to know he made the move. Which means he's starting to feel the walls move. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Or he's running out of time before Thursday and deciding to consolidate. Could be both. Yes. A pause. Are you all right? I'm fine. A pause. Eleanor, he knows you're in Dillon, I assumed. He's going to contact you directly. Let him. Her voice was even and clear. The voice of a woman who had made a decision and was on the other side of it. We have what we have. Desmond's statement. Documentation. Patricia put together. The timeline. A pause. And I've been thinking about something. Since Raleigh. She stopped. Tell me, Marcus said. Not tonight. Come to the house tomorrow morning. There's something I need to do, and I think it needs to happen before Thursday. What time? 8, she said. I'll have coffee. Marcus arrived at the Beaumont house at 8. Eleanor was at her working table when he came in. Laptop open. Papers in the careful order of someone who had been at it since before dawn. She had coffee waiting, and beside the drawing on her desk, still there, still propped against the lamp. A printed photograph, placed face down. She didn't open with small talk. Sit down, she said. There's something I should have told you earlier. I'm going to tell you now because it's relevant to what I'm planning to do today, and you deserve to hear it before it happens. Marcus sat. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. She looked at him with a directness she reserved for things she had decided to be honest about, regardless of outcome. When I first came to Dillon, she said, before I met you, I was doing what I always do, researching the environment I was moving into. A pause. I have access to resources most people don't. Legal capacity. Investigative capacity. Another pause. I came across your name and your situation. Marcus was very still. I found the framework of the investigation file, Eleanor said. The timeline. The parties involved. What was claimed and what the outcome was. She held his gaze. I've spent 23 years reading documents and understanding what they mean and what they're designed to obscure. I could see that the investigation into you was constructed to serve someone else's interests. Marcus said nothing. I retained a law firm in Washington, Eleanor said. Federal administrative law specialists. I asked them to do a formal review of the procedural record. Not the substance, just the process. Because process errors in a military administrative investigation are reviewable. She paused. The process in yours had errors. Multiple ones. The kitchen was very quiet. They've been working on it for 8 months, she said. I was waiting until there was something concrete to tell you. 3 days ago, Patricia called me. The review is complete. The firm has filed a formal petition for administrative correction with the Department of Defense. The errors are documented and supported. Patricia believes the flag in your file and the pension suspension are correctable. Formally, on record, Marcus looked at his hands on the table. The scarred knuckles, the specific calluses built up over decades of work. He thought about 5 o'clock mornings in the garage, about the extra weekend work, About the metal box. About 6 years of carrying something he knew was wrong and couldn't fix alone. He thought about what Holt had offered him yesterday. Your record cleared. The same thing Eleanor had been working on for 8 months. Offered by Holt as a transaction. Given by Eleanor because she had the ability, and it was the right thing to do. He thought about that difference, about what it meant. Why didn't you tell me, he said. Because when I started, you didn't know me, Eleanor said. And then when you did, I was trying to understand how to tell you something I'd done without your knowledge that affected your life. Directly, she held his gaze. I was afraid you'd see it as overreach, as me deciding I had the right to intervene without asking. You did decide that. Yes, she said, I did, and I'm not sure I was wrong to, but I understand if you think I was. Marcus was quiet for a long time. He thought about his grandmother Dorothy. The third thing she'd taught him before he was 12. You don't walk away from people who need help just because helping is inconvenient. Dorothy had not added a clause about asking permission first, because sometimes asking permission was its own way of walking away. What are you planning to do today? He said. Eleanor turned the photograph face up, a parking lot at night, a car. At the edge of the frame, a figure. Desmond gave me this before we left Raleigh, she said. He had it on his phone. He took it that night without quite knowing why. The reflex of a man who'd spent years close to power and learned, without understanding he'd learned it. That documentation had value. She looked at the photograph. It's date stamped. It shows Derek Holt at my car at 9:47 p.m. The accident was called in at 10:23. She paused. Combined with Desmond's notarized statement and Patricia's timeline documentation. This is enough for a federal investigator to take seriously. You're submitting it today, Marcus said. I'm doing something first, Eleanor said. I'm going to call Derek Holt. I'm going to offer him one opportunity to withdraw from the Senate race voluntarily, citing personal reasons, whatever he chooses. I'm going to tell him that if he does, the documentation goes into a sealed file and stays there. She paused. And I'm going to tell him that if he doesn't, everything goes to the FBI field office in Charlotte by end of business today. He won't take the offer. I know, Eleanor said, but I'm going to make it, because I've spent 6 years being the kind of person who didn't make demands, who absorbed things and stayed quiet and convinced herself that was wisdom. She looked at Marcus directly. It wasn't wisdom, it was fear. She folded her hands. I'm done being afraid of Derek Holt. Marcus looked at her, the woman in the chair, straight-backed, hands folded, the morning light through the window making her look exactly like what she was. Someone who had decided, You're doing this alone, he said. Not a question. I'm making the call alone, Eleanor said. You've been protecting me for weeks, Marcus. In the ways you do it, without calling it that. I know that, and I'm grateful in ways I don't have full language for. She paused. But this is mine to do. Holt needs to hear from me, not from my attorney, not from someone standing next to me. From me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, I'll be in the truck, he said. In the driveway. You don't have to. I'll be in the truck. Something in her face. Something she didn't have to name. All right, she said. He poured himself more coffee, went out, and sat in his truck in the driveway, engine off. The December morning around him, and the house quiet behind him. Inside, Eleanor Voss picked up her phone. She sat for a moment with it in her hand, looked out at the bare oak trees against the pale winter sky. She thought about 6 years, about what 6 years of being afraid does to you, how it changes your posture, your habits, the words you choose, and the ones you decide not to say. She thought about a man in a gray work shirt who had looked at a broken thing and fixed it without needing to be asked. She dialed. Holt answered on the third ring. Eleanor smooth, unsurprised. I was expecting your call. I know you were, she said. Listen to me carefully. Holt did not take the offer. Eleanor had known he wouldn't. Men like Holt, men who had spent their lives constructing the appearance of legitimacy around illegitimate actions, did not respond to quiet exits. They doubled down, they lawyered up, they called in people who owed them. What he said, when she finished, was, Eleanor, you have nothing that will hold up. What she said was, then you have nothing to worry about? She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her lap. She had been afraid, before she dialed, that hearing his voice would take her back to the specific quality of fear that had kept her quiet for 6 years. The fear that he was right, that she had nothing. The fear that speaking made it worse. The fear, underneath everything, that she was wrong about her own life. She had not been wrong. She called Patricia Wynne. File it, she said. Everything? Everything. Desmond's statement, the photograph, the timeline, procedural review on Marcus Cole's investigation. All of it. Today, a pause. Eleanor, are you certain? I've been certain for 6 years, she said. I'm done waiting for the right moment. File it. She went to the door and opened it. Marcus was in the truck in the driveway, as it said he would be. He looked up when the door opened. He read her face in the way he read things. Quickly, completely, without needing to be told. He got out of the truck. Patricia is filing with the FBI field office in Charlotte, Eleanor said. Everything today. Marcus stood in the driveway in the December morning. He looked at her for a moment, then up at the sky. The pale winter sky, clear and high and completely without warmth. The kind of sky that made you feel the distance between yourself and everything above you, then back at her. Good, he said. She looked at him. Are you all right? The procedural review, he said. On my file, you've had that in motion for 8 months. Yes, he was quiet. Then, thank you, 2 words. But the way he said them, with nothing wasted and nothing performed, made them carry the weight of everything behind them. The 5 o'clock mornings, the extra weekend work, the metal box. 6 years of carrying something he knew was wrong and couldn't fix alone. You would have done it for me, Eleanor said. You didn't know that when you started. No, she agreed. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I had the capability to do it. She paused. Which is the only real reason to do anything. Marcus looked at the bare oak trees, at the winter sky beyond them. What happens now, he said. Now we wait, Eleanor said. The FBI takes time. Holt has attorneys and connections. This isn't going to be clean or fast, she paused. But the wheel is turning, and it doesn't stop once it starts. Marcus nodded. He looked at her. Eleanor. Yes, the thing you held. Back on the way to Raleigh, he said. When you started to say something and stopped, she looked at him. She remembered the moment, in the truck, the highway ahead of them, the thing she'd almost said. I was going to say, she said slowly, that I had been alone with what I knew for 6 years, that for the first time, since coming to Dillon, I didn't feel alone with it. She paused. I didn't say it, because I wasn't sure how to say it without it sounding like more than it was, or less. Marcus looked at her for a moment. It's both, he said, more and less. At the same time, he paused. That's usually how the real things are. They stood in the driveway in the December cold. Not close, not distant. Just 2 people standing in a space they had come to share. Come inside, Eleanor said. The coffee's going cold. He came inside. 3 weeks passed. The FBI field office in Charlotte opened a formal inquiry. Derek Holt's town hall at the Civic Center went ahead as scheduled. A smaller crowd than his campaign had hoped for, according to Warren, who had heard it from the woman who cleaned the Civic Center on Fridays. Holt's performance was polished and hollow, the kind that lands well in rooms where no one knows anything and falls flat in rooms where someone does. Pruitt called Marcus on a Thursday morning. I heard something, Pruitt said. No preamble. That was how Pruitt operated when something mattered. From a contact at the state level. Not official. A pause. Holt's campaign counsel reached out to the Department of Defense Review Office last week about a procedural petition filed on behalf of a former service member. Another pause. They were told the petition was under formal review and not subject to outside inquiry. Marcus was at his workbench. Set down the socket he was holding. They pushed back, Pruitt continued. The DOD office told them the same thing again. He paused. Holt's counsel dropped it. Marcus was quiet. Then, Ray, okay. From the parking lot 6 years ago. A long silence on Pruitt's end. I know you have it, Marcus said. Eleanor's attorneys know you have it. Desmond's statement references a second potential witness who was in the area that night. He paused. I'm not asking you to do anything you haven't already decided to do. I'm just... He stopped. Started again. I know what it costs. Doing the right thing when you have something to lose. Pruitt was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that meant someone was sitting with something heavy. I've had that photograph for 3 years, Pruitt said finally. Got it from a shop owner who was closing up and clearing out old security footage. Didn't know what he had. Gave it to me because he figured I'd know what to do with it. Another pause. I didn't do anything with it because I didn't know how to do it without it coming apart in my hands. I know, Marcus said. Holt has people in this county, Marcus. Not many, but some. I know that too, silence. The FBI inquiry, Pruitt said. Yes, that changes the math. It does. Another silence. Longer. Marcus waited it out. I'll call Patricia Wynn's office, Pruitt said, today. Marcus exhaled slowly. Thank you, Ray. Don't thank me. I should have done it 3 years ago. A pause. Some things take longer than they should. Yes. Marcus said. They do. He hung up, stood in the garage for a moment. Then he walked to the back corner, looked at the metal box on the shelf. He picked it up, carried it to the workbench, opened it. He took out the medals one by one, set them in a line, looked at them, not with sentiment, not with performance, just with the direct attention of a man, looking at things that had cost him something real and were worth looking at straight. He took out the discharge papers, the commendations, the formal records of 20 years, and at the bottom the investigation letter, stamped, signed, the official shape of something unjust. He held it, then put it back, not because he was keeping it the way he'd kept it before, as something he carried without looking at, but because it was part of the record. And the record was being corrected, and when it was corrected, this document would be part of the story of what had been wrong and what had been made right. He closed the box, put it back on the shelf. He went back to work. At 5:30, his phone rang. Patricia Wynn. Mr. Cole, she said, I want you to hear this directly from me before it goes into formal correspondence. A pause. The Department of Defense Review Office contacted our firm this afternoon. The administrative petition has been approved. The procedural errors in your 2019 investigation have been formally noted on record. The flag in your service file will be removed, and the suspended portion of your pension will be reinstated, retroactive to the date of suspension. Marcus stood in the middle of his garage. He stood there for a moment. Just stood, Mr. Cole? Yes, he said. I heard you. There will be formal correspondence within the week. But I wanted you to know today. Thank you, he said. He put the phone in his pocket. The news about Holt came 3 days after Patricia's call. Not from Patricia, from Warren. From Warren, who had the television on in the diner kitchen and came out to find Marcus at the counter. He set a coffee down, turned the small TV on the shelf so Marcus could see it. A press conference outside a federal building in Charlotte. In Charlotte, 2 FBI agents, a statement being read. Derek Holt had been taken into federal custody that morning on charges related to obstruction of justice and evidence tampering in connection with a 2019 vehicular incident. His Senate campaign had been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Holt was not on screen. His attorney was. Marcus watched the screen for a moment, then looked at his coffee. "Well," Warren said. "Yeah," Marcus said. Warren went back to the kitchen. Marcus drank his coffee. Outside on Main Street, Dylan went about its morning the way it always did. Unhurried, unaware, ordinary, in all the right ways. He paid, walked to the garage. He stood in the garage. The radio was playing something he didn't recognize. Outside, December evening was coming in fast. The light going from gray to dark, the way it did this time of year, the street lights on Elm Street clicking on one by one. He thought about 20 years, about what those years had cost, and what they'd built, and what had been taken, and what was being given back. He thought about his grandmother Dorothy. The first thing she taught him, your word, is the only thing that's entirely yours. He had lived that for 20 years in the Navy and 6 years in Dillon. And it was possible to keep your word completely and still have someone decide it was something else. But sometimes, if you were patient, if you kept doing the work in front of you, if you didn't let the injustice make you into someone you didn't want to be, the record came around. He locked the garage, walked home in the cold, made dinner, ate it at the kitchen table in the quiet. After dinner, he looked at the photograph of Diane on the shelf by the window, taken during their 3rd summer together on a beach in North Carolina. Her laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. He looked at it for a while. "Something happened today," he said to the photograph. Not out loud, just the thought, directed somewhere specific. The way you directed things sometimes, so when the person you most wanted to tell was somewhere you couldn't reach by phone. He sat with that for a moment. He picked up his phone and called Eleanor. She answered immediately. "Patricia called you," she said. "Yes." A pause. "How do you feel?" Marcus looked at the photograph of Diane, at the window, at the dark December street outside, at the life he had built in this town, small and real, and increasingly, he was only now understanding not what he thought it was. He had thought it was a place to be left alone, a place to be quiet, a place to stop. He understood now that it was the place where things had started again. "I feel like myself," he said. "Maybe more than I have in a while." Eleanor was quiet on the other end, the kind of quiet that was full, rather than empty. "Marcus," she said. May's Saturday morning I'll be there," he said. He put the phone down, looked at the room, at the small, carefully tended life around him, at the chair across the table that had been empty for years, and at the particular quality of that emptiness, which was changing, slowly, without announcement, the way all real changes happened, into something he didn't have a word for yet, but that felt, for the first time in a long time, like something other than loss. It was the last Saturday morning of December. Cold, the kind of cold that comes from a clear sky with no clouds to hold anything in. Dillon lay quiet under it, streets empty at 8. The holiday decorations stirring slightly in the wind off the Piedmont. Warren had the diner open. He always had the diner open. Marcus walked up Elm Street from the garage, hands in his jacket pockets, breath visible in the cold air. He was early. He was always early. Some habits don't change because the circumstances around them change. They just become themselves in a new context. Warren had his coffee, waiting. Set it on the counter without ceremony. "Cold," Warren said. "Yes. Supposed to warm by Tuesday." "Good." Warren went back to the kitchen. Marcus sat in his booth by the window and looked out at Main Street. A car passed, then nothing. The street settled back into its Saturday morning quiet. He heard the van at 8:17. The lift. Eleanor's chair on the ramp Warren had built. The door Warren had it in place already, the way he always did now, without making it into a moment. Eleanor came in. She looked, Marcus thought. Like a woman who was sleeping better than she had been. Not dramatically different. Eleanor Voss didn't do anything dramatically, but something in how she carried herself was different from the fall. Something that had come untensed. Warren brought her coffee without being asked. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Marcus said. They were quiet for a while. Warren's radio in the kitchen played something old and unhurried. The cold outside made the diner feel warmer than it was. Holt's attorney contacted Patricia on Thursday, Eleanor said after a while, making noise about the photograph, challenging the chain of custody on Desmond's statement. "That's expected," Marcus said. Yes, Patricia expected it. The FBI expected it. She drank her coffee. "It's going to be slow and loud for a while, and then it's going to be what it is. And what is it? A man who did something wrong, and evidence that he did it, the machinery that processes those two things into an outcome." She paused. "The machinery is slow, but it runs in one direction." Marcus looked out the window. "You're staying in Dillon," he said. Not a question. He had known it for weeks, seen it in how Eleanor moved through the town. Less like a visitor, more like someone who had made her peace with a place. "I'm opening a small regional office," she said. "Voss Industries has projects in Eastern NC. It makes operational sense to have a presence here," a pause, "and I like it here. It's not Charlotte." "No," a pause. "I spent 23 years in Charlotte making something. I built something real. I'm proud of it." She looked at her coffee. "But at some point you have to ask yourself what you built it for, what the life around the work looks like." She paused. "I think I stopped asking that question somewhere around year 15. It took losing the ability to walk and moving to a town where nobody knew my name to start asking it again." Marcus said nothing for a moment. "In the garage," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Are you staying?" He looked out the window at Elm Street, at the town that had become, without his planning for it, the place where he lived. Not temporarily, not as a stopping point, as the place itself. "Pete, Harmon sold me this garage because he wanted someone who'd actually work in it," Marcus said. "I've been working in it for 6 years." He paused. "I think that counts as staying." Eleanor almost smiled. "The real one, the one that didn't announce itself." Warren appeared from the kitchen with plates, set them down without comment, looked at neither of them in a way that communicated perfect awareness of both, went back to the kitchen. They ate. Outside the window, Dillon was waking up in its slow Saturday way. A family walked past, bundled against the cold. The man from 2 blocks down walked his old dog, the way he walked it every morning. The grocery delivery truck turned off Main onto the side street. The ordinary, reliable texture of a town, going about its day. "Marcus," Eleanor said. He looked up. "The drawing on my desk," she paused. "I'd like to have something made, properly, for the new office. A portrait. Not corporate, something real. Something that looks like a person, not a position." Marcus held her gaze. "I know someone who does portraits," he said. "Works out of her studio on the north side. Good work. Will you take me?" Yes, they finished breakfast. Warren cleared the plates and refilled the coffee, the way he always did. Because Warren did what the situation required without waiting for it to ask him. Outside, Dillon sat in its December cold, ordinary and real and fully itself. Marcus paid. They went out together into the cold, Marcus in his jacket, Eleanor in her navy wool coat, the oak trees bare above the street, the year ending, the way years ended, gradually and then all at once. On the sidewalk, Eleanor looked up at the sky. The clear, cold, midwinter sky with no warmth in it, but all the clarity in the world. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Marcus looked up at the same sky, then back down at the street, at the town, at the work and the life and the slow, real accumulation of days that meant something. "My grandmother told me 3 things when I was 12 years old," he said. Eleanor looked at him. Your word is the only thing that's entirely yours, he said. If something's broken and you can fix it, fix it. He paused. And you don't walk away from people who need help, just because helping is inconvenient. Eleanor was quiet. I've been thinking about the third one, Marcus said. About how she said it. She didn't say you help people and then step back, she said. You don't walk away, he paused. Meaning you stay. The wind moved through the bare oak branches above them. You stay, Eleanor said. You stay, Marcus said. She looked at. Back in October, when I made you that offer, I remember, you turned it down because you said you didn't want to be paid to show up. She held his gaze ease. Were you right about that? Marcus thought about the parking lot, the amber light blinking on the armrest of a chair. The 8 minutes. She sat on the sidewalk, thinking about something she hadn't thought about in a long time. The 27 minutes in a truck, in the rain, the Saturday mornings. The drive to Raleigh, driveway in December. Yes, he said, I was right about that. Eleanor nodded slowly. So was I, she said, when I made it. I knew you'd say no. I made it because I needed to know what kind of man you were. She paused. And you showed me. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Same time next week, he said. Same time next week, she said. He walked back toward the garage. She drove the van back toward Beaumont Road. Warren stepped outside the diner, something he rarely did in December, and stood on the sidewalk with his coffee cup, watching both of them go in their separate directions. He had been running this diner for 31 years. He had seen people come to Dylan because they were passing through. He had seen people come because they had nowhere else to go. He had seen people stay because leaving was too much effort. And once in a while, not often, but enough, he had seen people stay because Dylan was exactly where they were supposed to be. He looked at the empty sidewalk, at the street, at the town that was his town and had been his whole life, small and real and still here. He went back inside, started the grill for the lunch crowd outside. The year moved toward its end. The street was quiet. The decorations stirred in the wind. Somewhere up Elm, the garage bay door was rolling open, and the sound of it, low, familiar, the sound of a man starting his work, carried clean and clear in the cold morning air.